Hello everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. I hope that you are all well. If you are new, thanks so much for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. Today is Thanksgiving here in Canada, so happy Thanksgiving to all of you who are celebrating this weekend. We have been celebrating this weekend and we just returned from a delicious meal with friends, and now I'm going to talk with all of you about the books that I read in September. I read a total of 13 books in September. 3 of those books I read for the BookTube Prize, and I judged the final round in translated fiction. And those winners were just announced on October the 8th, so I decided to wait to do my whole wrap up until now so that I could talk about all of the books in this round. So first I'm going to start with the BookTube Prize. And I'm going to start by saying that I'm a little disappointed. I figured by the time we got to the final round that I would have 6 really good books, and I hoped that at least 1 or 2 of them would just blow me away. Unfortunately, that didn't really happen for me with the translated fiction. There were 2 that were clearly the top 2 for me, so that was something that was good, but I didn't rate any of these more than 4.5 stars, and I kind of feel that getting to the finals meant that there would be at least a 5-star, so I will share the 6 books in order that I rated them from lowest to highest, and then give some thoughts about the final results. In the number 6 spot for me was Disquiet by Zulfu Livaneli. This is translated from the Turkish by Brendan Freely. And this book had a lot going for it for me. It's a story about a Syrian refugee and a young man who is tending to people in the refugee camps. I think the story was good. Then I watched Jen from Remembered Reads talk about this book. And she found that the translation of the book changed some things. So specifically, there is a chapter that was originally called America, America, and it was changed to Germany, Germany. So I may have rated this book higher if I didn't know about this. But I would need to know why this decision was made. And I actually think that if the chapter had not been changed, it would have had, I think, more of an impact. But because of this, it ended up being rated quite low for me because I feel like it changes things quite a bit, and it also means that other things could have been changed as well in the translation. So, this book was not in the top 3 of the finals, so I'm grateful for that. In my number 5 spot, I put The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World. And this is by Laura Imai Messina. It's translated from the Italian by Lucy Rand. The concept of this book was interesting. The idea that there is a phone booth in a man's garden in Japan, that people are able to talk to their loved ones after the 2011 tsunami. So this kind of had vibes similar to Before the Coffee Gets Cold, if you've read that. But this fell flat for me. The themes were good, and it's something that I would normally be drawn to. You know, grief and loss and healing. These are all things that I do read about, but I just found the characters in this to be lacking. They went kind of through the motions, but I didn't feel a lot of emotion from them, and in a book about something like this, I think that I just expected there to be more depth to it. So this also didn't make it through to the final 3. In my 3rd and 4th spot, these were the books where they could have been interchanged. So I had to really think about which book I would put in the top 3. So in my number 4, I put The Art of Losing by Alice Zeniter, translated from the French by Frank Wynne. I know that many people have been loving this book, and it came in 2nd in the final results, and I'm not surprised. But for me, It was in the top of my bottom 3. Again, it had a number of things that normally appeal to me. It's a story about multi-generations. In this case, the story is about an Algerian family. And it also has so many themes that I normally read about. Immigration, colonization, and family dynamics. But first, I felt like this book took me forever to read, and I was never excited to get back to it. Every once in a while, I would think, oh, it's about to get really good, but I never got fully engaged in this, so it did end up in my bottom 3. That leaves my top 3. I ranked Brickmakers by Selva Almada at number 3, which is also where it landed in the finals, and this is translated from the Spanish by Annie McDermott. I found this novel to be very engaging from the very beginning. I thought it had a real sense of place. It begins with a scene at a fair or carnival, and I could hear, smell, see, touch, and taste it. And this is sort of a retelling of Romeo and Juliet with a same-sex couple, and it is also loosely based on a true story of a rivalry between 2 families. And this story has revenge and a feud. It's violent. It doesn't mince words. It moves quickly. So when I got to this book, after some others that were a bit more disappointing for me, this was nice for a change of pace. And I would definitely read more by this author as well, which is also a really good sign. At my number 2, I have The Anomaly by Herve Tellier. This is translated from the French by Adriana Hunter. And this is the book that came in first in the finals, and I am totally good with that because I wavered back and forth between my first and second place. So this book surprised me. I was not expecting to like it as much as I did, but it starts off really strong by introducing us to Blake. And then we are introduced to many other characters, like, 10, 11, 12 characters, something like that. And among them are a pilot, a lawyer, a hitman, that's Blake, a writer, and a little girl. And the story takes place in 2021, where a flight from Paris to New York in March is experiencing a lot of turbulence, but it lands safely. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So, 3 months later in June, the same plane appears out of the skies. The plane and every passenger, like over 200 passengers, is a perfect duplication with the same memories except for the last 3 months. So if you've ever seen the show Manifest, where a plane took off and then 5.5 years later, after everyone is presumed dead, the plane lands. And to the people on board, it was a normal flight, but a lot had changed, obviously, in that 5.5 years. So the same happens in this book, except there has been a duplication. So in those 3 months, some people have died, and what the author does is really interesting. Each of the characters has a different reaction and has to figure out how they will react to their other selves. So, do you live with yourself? Do you react with a fight or flight? And there's also a story within the story, because one of the characters, as I said, is a writer who has written a book called The Anomaly, and it has a lot of characters. So there is even this duplication of the author and the book that you're reading, in a way. So this is one that I have thought a lot about. And then finally at number 1 for me is a book, that didn't make it into the top 3 of the finals, but it's a book that I read in the first round, and I've mentioned it a few times on my channel, and that is How to Order the Universe by Maria Jose Ferrada. This is translated from the Spanish by Elizabeth Bryer. And this book was also a surprise. First, because of its cover, which kind of threw me off, and second, because it is quick with very brief chapters, yet somehow in its brevity and almost vagueness, it manages to tell a coming-of-age story. and it gives a glimpse of a relationship between a father and daughter. And it goes from this charming read to facing the darkness that exists in reality. So this is a gem of a book that I originally rated, I think, 4 or 4.5 stars. So it has remained at the top of my list. So I'm pleased that I had the same bronze book and that my silver book actually won gold. And like I said, I'm not surprised that The Art of Losing made it onto the podium. So thanks again to Robert, who does a lot of work and does a great job at making the BookTube Prize happen. I'm glad I took part this year. I haven't decided yet if I will judge next year or not, but I have a little bit of time to make that decision. But I will leave a link to the BookTube Prize below so you can check that out. That leaves me with 10 more books that I finished in September. As usual, I will start with the first lines and talk about the book, what I liked or didn't like, and who I would recommend the book to. So I'm going to start with the Canadian authors. I have 6 of them, so let's begin. The first book starts, "We must do something to pass the time," I thought. And this is from The Son of the House by Cheluchi, Onyemelukwe-Onuobia. I always have to look at it to make sure I say it somewhat correctly. This debut book was shortlisted for the Giller Prize in 2021. The book takes place in Nigeria. The prologue begins with 2 women who have been kidnapped and are in prison together. They decide that to pass the time, they will tell each other their stories. So the structure of the book is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is 1972, and it tells the story of Nwabulu. Part 2 is 1973, which tells the story of Julie. And part 3 is 2011, which is In the Hold, and each chapter alternates between Nwabulu and Julie. So as sometimes happens when a book is structured like this, I tend to like one storyline over the other. In this case, I liked Nwabulu's story better than Julie's, but I did enjoy the writing throughout the entire thing. So Nwabulu's upbringing is not a pleasant one, mostly because of her stepmother. So when she is sent to work in a couple's home, she goes very willingly, mostly to get away from her current situation, and because she's told that she will be able to go to school, which she really wants to do. And she realizes quickly that she won't be going to school, and that the grass is certainly not greener in her new situation. Julie in part 2 is part of the upper class and becomes the second wife of a very rich man. And to raise her status in the marriage, Julie adopts a son and raises him as her own. And then the final section kind of brings everything together with the chapters giving alternate perspectives. And then we learn how the 2 women are connected once everything is kind of revealed. So this would be a good book for anyone who likes books set in Nigeria, books about women's lives, and books told in alternating perspectives. I did love the writing in this, and I do look forward to what this author will publish next, because I will definitely read it. The next book begins, people ask me things like where I parked my car, say 477 days ago, and I'm immediately able to tell them it was slot 173 on the 3rd level of the Walgreens Parkade, and that it cost $1.50, and there was a dark blue Subaru wagon on my left, with a stuffed Garfield doll wearing sunglasses on the dashboard. And this is from Binge, 60 Stories to Make Your Brain Feel Different, by Douglas Coupland. I borrowed this from the library because it was a potential book for the Giller Prize long list, and the paperback doesn't come out until next year, like January of next year. So the 60 stories a lot of them are about memory. In fact, the first story reminded me of people like Mary Lou Henner, who remember every day of their lives. And there's also stories about people who are ill. There are characters with cancer, cystic fibrosis, rare blood types. Some stories are about 9/11. about affairs. They deal with mortality, COVID, hoarding, dementia. Every once in a while, a story would be very jarring and surprising. And sometimes the stories would also be connected, kind of telling the same story from a different perspective, a different character. So I think that those were probably my favorite of those stories. This is a good collection if you like short stories and if you are already a fan of Douglas Coupland. If you haven't read anything by Douglas Coupland and you're curious, then this might be a good opportunity to kind of see if you like his writing. The next book begins, I grew up in a small village on Canada's west coast called Kitkatla. And this is from a picture book called Ben the Sea Lion by Roy Henry Vickers. He's also the illustrator. And this is a sweet story based on the author's own experiences as a young boy. So when Roy's uncle accidentally catches a baby sea lion in his fishing net, Roy and his cousin nurse the sea lion back to health. And the sea lion, Ben, grows so big and is quite a character. The boys kind of share many adventures with the sea lion until they have to bring Ben back to the wild. So this is a great book if you have, some youngsters that you would like to read it to, if you are interested in Indigenous art and storytelling. Next on the list begins, in 2011, I was offered a writing residency in Berlin, and this is from Stray Dogs by Rawi Hage. This was on the Giller long list when I started reading it, and it is now on the short list. There are 11 short stories in this collection. Many of them have photographers as characters. The stories deal with art, philosophy, and the idea of having a foot in two worlds. And the first story is about a Lebanese writer in Berlin who forms a friendship with a German couple. The second story was, I would say, one of my favorites. It was about the idea that the consumption of wheat is leading to weight gain in Lebanon, and this becomes something much deeper. The title story is also a favorite, and it's about a photographer that goes to a conference in Tokyo and is asked to present a paper about two images of two different dogs. And this had a powerful ending. And then there's Mother, 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 which is about a son who is grieving for his mother and is remembering his childhood. The Whistle is about a man dealing with depression. And there's also a story called The Fate of the Son of the Man on the Horse. And this is about a man who is visited by Sophia Loren. So I will talk about this a little bit more when I do my prediction for the Giller Prize winner. Hopefully I will do that soon. This would be good if you are interested in short story collections, if that's your thing, and stories that take place in Lebanon and Canada. Next up is a book that I talked about in my Giller Prize hopefuls because I thought that it might make the long list. It didn't, but it was also a most anticipated book of the year for me. And it begins, Tree's Stomach Growls. And this is from Haven by Emma Donoghue. This is the third or fourth book that I've read by Emma Donoghue, and I have enjoyed all of her writing so far. When I started Haven, I was a bit disappointed for two reasons. The beginning was very slow for me, and I felt like it didn't set the story up well. You're just kind of plunked into a situation that seems a bit unlikely that things would go the way that they go. The story takes place in the 7th century in Ireland. A monk named Art has a dream about an island that he believes he's supposed to go to. And he takes two other monks with him. Treein, who is 20 years old and has been at the monastery since he was 13. And Cormac, who is the other monk, he entered the monastery after his wife and children died from the Black Death. Art himself becomes their prior. And the fact that Art has had this dream, and it's obvious that they are going to act on it, seemed very almost random and strange without some sort of setup. However, once I got past that, I started seeing this more as a survival story. And as the three monks are preparing for their journey, they are making decisions about what to bring. And now you have to understand that they are going on this very long journey. They don't know what to expect. They don't know where they're going. They will be incredibly isolated. And when making the decisions on what they're bringing, they grapple between the practical and spiritual. And because of this, they leave some very essential things behind. And once they find the island is when the story got even more interesting to me. This is when we really get to know the three monks, and we see how being isolated affects them, especially art. It allows the prior to make his own rules and to kind of make their situation even more difficult. There's a lot of tension between obedience, loyalty, and friendship, and doing what is right. Their survival story becomes more about spiritual, emotional, and psychological survival than surviving the elements. So it wasn't until I actually finished the book and was able to look back that I really appreciated what Emma Donoghue was doing with this story. So this would be a good story for anyone interested in character-driven novels. You do need to be okay with a slower-paced story, and it also has historical relevance. The last Canadian book I read in September, and I forgot to write down the first line before it went back to the library, so I apologize. But the book is Mouth to Mouth by Antoine Wilson. This book was longlisted for the Giller Prize, and it was my wild card for the shortlist, but it didn't make it. So I really liked the setup of this book. The narrator is never named, but he meets Jeff Cook, who is someone from his past when they are both at JFK Airport. And I would say they are at the most former acquaintances, but Jeff Cook ends up telling him about his life, and sharing how his life changed once he saved a man from drowning. And the man he saved is an art dealer. And Jeff kind of becomes almost obsessed with the man and finds ways to be part of his life, including becoming part of the art world. So as Jeff tells this story, we learn about how Jeff and this man's lives are connected, and how Jeff has almost defined himself by this moment of saving this man and what has transpired from that moment. So the event can either kind of give his own life purpose or not. So this is a bit of a slow burn, but there's lots to think about in this one. So this would be good for anyone who likes the type of book where a story is told to someone else. Definitely a slow burn novel, and one that might have a few surprises along the way. Next up is a book from a series that I turn to usually once or twice a year as a comfort read, and it begins, "In my mind, my kitchen is filled with crackers and cheese, roast chicken leftovers, farm fresh eggs, and coffee beans ready to grind." And this is from Fearless 14 by Janet Ivanovich, and this is the obviously 14th book in the Stephanie Plum series. So it's hard to say too much about this book since the books, especially as we get further into the series, they feel a lot alike. But this is just a fun series which I revisit and basically want to meet up with the characters again. And it's one that I don't have to think too much about. So if you are new to this series, I would say start from the beginning. The first few books still remain my favorites. Stephanie Plum is a bounty hunter. She has two guys, Ranger and Joe Morelli, who are interested in her, and she's interested in both of them. And then she has Lola, who is a former prostitute, as a sidekick. And there are just lots of crazy adventures along the way. In this one, the side story of Lola and Tank possibly getting hitched was a lot of fun. Grandma Mosier is always interesting, and there were, a few good chuckles along the way. So this is for, I would say, anyone who is already a fan of Stephanie Plum, is looking for a fun mystery, and wants to reunite with these very quirky characters. The next two books are mystery thrillers. The first one begins, "You see something and you raise your hand." And this is the first line from We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. And this is a thriller book that I had heard many good things about, and I wanted to try it out. So what made this book for me was the main character. I loved her. At 13 years old, Duchess is an old soul with a lot of spunk. She calls herself an outlaw, and she is the person who looks out for her 5-year-old brother. And I really felt for her in this story. Her mother needs mothering herself, and unfortunately, Duchess and her brother experience a lot of loss and neglect in their short lives. And then, of course, there's the mystery part of this book. So Vincent King has been in prison for decades and is about to get out. And his best friend is, or maybe was, a man named Walk, who is the chief of police. And he's actually the reason that Vincent went to prison. So the mystery becomes more complex as secrets are revealed. And I really liked the relationship between Walk and Duchess. They kind of, they understand each other at a deep level. The characters and relationships, I think, were my favorite part of the book. So this one deals with some heavier subject matter. So you would need to be, prepared for that. This is not the fun mystery type of book like Fearless 14. This would be, I would say, for anyone who likes a feisty young protagonist, mystery thriller, and you do have to be okay with some heavier scenes for sure. The next one begins, "I am folding laundry at my kitchen table when the police car pulls up." And this is from The Mother-in-Law by Sally Hepworth. I read The Good Sister last month and was wanting to read more from Sally Hepworth, who is an Australian author. So I picked this up, and here's what I am learning about Sally Hepworth. She does family dynamics really well, and that is obvious in this book. So this story begins with the death of Diana, Lucy's mother-in-law. And there is an investigation, because at first it seems like it's a suicide. But there are some questionable things about the death that says that it might not be a suicide. So the story is mostly told in alternating perspectives between Lucy and Diana. And it's also told in dual timelines. So the past leading up to Diana's death and the present, what is happening after Diana's death. And I love that I suspected everyone at some point. I love a story that keeps me, guessing and figuring it out. And I also love how Diana's character is written. There are times where I really didn't like her, and then at other times where I just felt a lot of sympathy for her. So the dynamics between siblings, parents, and children, marriages, it's all done really, really well. So that is 2 for 2 for Sally Hepworth, and I may try her newest book, which is coming out soon, called The Soulmate. The Mother-in-Law would be good for, I would say, anyone who obviously likes mystery, likes books about families, and likes well-developed characters that you can feel like you know. The final book I have to talk about is another book in translation, and it begins, "This morning, Rhino telephoned." And this is from My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, and it's translated from the Italian by Anne Goldstein. So this is the first book in the Neapolitan series, and I read this with the Up to No Good book club, which is Fraser from Fraser Simon's Springboard Thought, Shelley from Shelley Swearengen's Library, Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, along with our friends and subscribers, Deb, Sonia, and Angela. So at the time that we met to talk about this book, I had only read 50 or 60 pages, something like that. But I did eventually finish this, and I enjoyed it. I found it took me a while to get into the story, and now I almost feel like in some ways that I can't talk about the book yet, since I feel like it's not over, it's not the whole story. There are still 3 more books in this series, and I have a feeling, or maybe I'm just hoping, that they will continue to shed light on what I read here. So this story begins in Naples in the 1950s, and this is narrated by Elena Erlenu. The choice to see this story through her perspective, I think, is an interesting one. She defines a lot about her own self and her self-worth and her life through her observations and friendship with Lila. And what I enjoyed most about this book was the writing and definitely the sense of place. When Lenu and Lila are young, we are part of their world, which is really their neighborhood with their classmates, their friends, neighbors. It's kind of an everyone knows everyone kind of community. And as they get older and their friendship grows, so does their world around them. And we become, I would say, even more aware of the place that they live and how they fit into the world. I will definitely continue reading this series, maybe even finish it this year. We'll see. This would be good for anyone who likes books set in Italy, books about friendship, and I would say that at least for this first one of the series, it's a coming-of-age story. So those are all of the books that I finished in September. Please let me know if you have read any of them. Did you follow or judge the BookTube Prize? What are your thoughts on that? Will you be judging next year? Are there any books on this list that you would like to read? Are there any that interest you? And please let me know what books you enjoyed most in September. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.